All right, hello, Richardson, Texas. Y'all are doing good tonight. So happy you're here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter. And for those of you who do know me, my name is still Peter. I'm one of the campus pastors here called to serve you, this community, and the greater UTD student body. I've not been here since 1995, though I was alive, not here. I came here in 2011 as a tiny little freshman. Actually, I was probably about the same size I am now. And I was invited the first week of school to F&F. I came, and I left immediately after the last song. And I did not plan on coming back. And here we are 12 years later, second time at F&F. No, that's not true. I was invited again the second week. I decided to give it another shot. And before I could immediately leave, I was introduced to new friends. I was invited to go to Brahms, and there I made my first real friends in college. So here we are on the second week of F&F at UTD. Don't miss the opportunity to find real friends and real community here tonight. Whether you believe in Jesus or not, I believe that he has something good in store for you here, if you're willing to give it a shot. I believe that there is a home here for you if you want it. So that first F&F I went to, I remember thinking to myself, man, for how many people there are here. It was in this room with probably a few less people than we have now. But I thought, for how many people are here, the sermon really wasn't that great. And the worship didn't really have the right production level for the size of the audience. And you may be thinking that about my sermon today, but looking back, it's so interesting to see why I didn't bother asking why so many people would show up when I thought the sermon and worship wasn't up to snuff. Why were so many people coming to F&F? Perhaps they weren't coming as consumers. Maybe they were coming for something more than just a nice service, dinner, and a show. Right? It was that second week that really showed me why so many people would come. It was because of the community they found here. It was a place where we felt wanted, that our presence was noticed every week, that even a crowd of over 100, you weren't glossed over. But that kind of community doesn't just happen. We didn't just naturally become loving towards one another. We didn't naturally initiate and invite people to things. To have godly community, you have to make godly choices. To have godly community, you have to make godly choices. But it's interesting, right? Because choices indicates that it's voluntary, right? That no one's forcing you to do something. You can't force a godly community. Just like you can't force a good family to happen, right? I remember my parents, telling me, like, you gotta love your siblings, right? All right, you hit your brother again. Like, you gotta say you're sorry. And they can force me to say that I'm sorry, but they can't make me feel it. Right? You can't force a good family. How many people have experienced rules, but have never really experienced that heart change? In the same way, Jesus can tell us what it takes to make a godly community, but he can't force us to do it. The moment he forces us to do it, it's no longer a godly community. It's up to us to make those godly choices, sometimes even when it's hardest for us, and we're going to pay the cost, because we know it's worth it in the end. It's worth it in the end for us, and it's worth it in the end for the people who will come after us. So tonight, and for the next couple of weeks, we're in this Listening Carefully to Jesus series. And tonight I want us to look at what Jesus says about godly community and godly friendship. and I'm going to play with this pen for the entire night, even though I don't need it. So, first off, I want to take a look at one of the most confusing parables in the entire Bible. All right, so buckle up. Everybody reach over, buckle up, click. We are going into Luke 16. So now that you're buckled up, you can open up your phones, open up that YouVersion Bible app. We're going to Luke 16. All right, so this is a parable, which is just a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. All right, these days we really only talk about parables about Jesus' stories. So it's a simple story that Jesus uses to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. So Luke 16, starting in verse 1, says, Jesus told his disciples, all right, get ready. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. You're fired. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Sorry, I skipped a few in there. I skipped to 13. No one can serve two masters. All right, 14. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Okay. I wish I could spend the entire night talking about what just happened. I mean, this parable makes you say, what? But I do not have the time to get into the weeds. We can talk and debate all day about who the rich man is supposed to be, why he didn't get angry at this dishonest manager. What is Jesus trying to say about this manager? I mean, I read multiple commentaries talking about interest rates in the ancient world, why one dude got 50% off and the other dude only got 20% off. Like, were they in the same room? Was like the second guy like, I mean, I'll take it, but why didn't I get that deal? Like, maybe the guy didn't like him as much. But in the end, this is one of the parables that Jesus tells us exactly what he wants us to take away from it. All right, so without getting into all the details, we're just going to go for what Jesus tells us is about, right? He says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Have you ever been told by a parent or professor to do some networking? Because that's what this sounds like, right? I think a lot of us can feel weird about this word networking, right? If you are a JSON major, where are my JSON majors at in here? Yeah, you guys are going to make the big bucks. All right, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's making connections for like future use. And we can feel slimy about it because there are slimy ways to do it. Because we can end up using people rather than caring about them or caring about that relationship. Yet what's the alternative to networking? It's not talking to anyone at all and just staying in your hidey hole, right? That we never make connections that might benefit us in any way ever. None of those, right? That's the alternative that we think is better, less slimy. And that's why Jesus says the people of this world are more shrewd than the people of the light. They see that making relationships is important for life. Now, they may do it selfishly, but they see that those relationships are important. And we would rather focus on following the rules of like, don't do this, don't do that. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to study in my room. I'm going to get all the great grades. And I'm going to graduate and know nobody. Rather than realizing what has eternal value. It's people. It's the relationships, right? People have eternal value. And those relationships we build with them will last into eternity. We don't have to do it selfishly. We don't have to do it slimily, as if that was a word. But we can do it well, but we can network or just make friends and build connections in an unselfish way. Am I going to spend my time in college focused on money and making money, right? That's what Jesus says as well. Use your worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. What's going to last? The money that I make or the friends? Or in many of our cases, is it the grades that will enable me to make a lot of money? Am I going to spend a lot of time on those? Or am I going to invest in friendships that will last long after all the money is gone and people forget my GPA, people forget what major I took, all of that? I've had too many friends who have skipped out on things because they have homework. We choose things over friendships. Now, there are times that we do, I'm not saying like go fail all your classes, like just make friends and you'll be fine. I'm not saying that, but we want to get that 100 at the cost of all of our friends. When I think that 93 is just fine. Sometimes even that 85, God forbid, we get a B. Oh my goodness. I remember I had a friend who was a very hardworking pre-med student. He led core his sophomore year, but he didn't lead his junior year. He hunkered down, he studied, he had the MCAT, he got the best grades. I mean, he was a friggin' genius, and yet he still was just like, nope, like narrow-focused textbooks. And he was miserable that year. And so when it came time for senior year, he knew what he had to do. Even with med school interviews coming up and ramped up hours for volunteering and tutoring at his job, he added on top of all that being a Corfa again. Not because he had more time, he had less time, but because he knew and he had realized that the investment in relationships would be what kept him going. That year, he was available for his friends, to play on the worship team, and when it came time to choose which med school to go to, of which he got into very prestigious ones, because again, he was a genius, he chose the one closest to his friends, because that was what had eternal value to him. Are you generous with your time? Are you generous with your wealth? Are you generous with your possessions? If you start using what you have now to invest in relationships, then you can start a habit. You can start building your character to be somebody who continues to invest in friendships when you do have the career, the wealth, the house, the car, whatever it is. I remember my senior year, there was a major pivot in career. And basically I was staying here and doing a summer internship with Focus. And Mandy let me live at her house rent-free for an entire summer. Now that is using your worldly possessions, your worldly wealth to make friends, right? I mean, we're friends. We're friends. You heard it right here, confirmation. Everybody heard it, right? I mean, I was just at the house the other day. hanging out with the dogs, talking. So, yeah. I remember, I mean, this is like only barely related, but I remember my first year out of college, my car broke down. And so I really needed a car. And I'd bought that car, but I wanted to get another car real fast. And I didn't have all the money yet. And so my dad was going to send me that money like piecemeal. And I remember having the audacity and yet the confidence to go up to Brandon and say like, hey, could I borrow $5,000 like today to go get a car? I did not buy a car. It did take longer than just that day. But I mean, I just remember having the audacity and confidence that Brandon would just give me $5,000 and trust that I would give it back to him eventually. But I mean, he was willing. But you know, we didn't have to do that. So that was another thing. Use your worldly wealth to invest in friendships. But I think examples like that, examples like my parents growing up, when I bought, I mean, this is a risky story to tell you. When I bought my truck, and yes, I do have a truck, so yes, you can ask me to help you when you move things. But when I bought my truck, it was the most expensive purchase I'd ever made in my life. It wasn't a new truck. It wasn't a fancy truck, but it was still expensive. All right, it's pretty fancy is what Mandy says. It's 2011, you know, my freshman year. 2011 holds a deep spot in my heart. But I remember talking to God and saying like, okay, I'm going to get this truck, and I'm going to say yes to every person who asks me to move them in the next year. And I kept that promise, and here we are like 5 years later, and I say yes most of the time if I can do it. So, you know, file that away. I will do it. I will help you. I will gladly help you. But sometimes I'll just say, just take my truck. Leave me out of it. Yeah, I had a lot of great examples in my life of people who use their wealth to bless me. So what wealth are you hoarding for yourself? You know, is it time, possessions, or actual physical money, cash? What could you be giving and sharing with others? Or what wealth are you planning on hoarding for yourself? Will your future be a big house, a nice car, a wife or husband and kids, but no friends that you can call when you need help or get sick? Because that's the story of so many American families. And if you're in college, it'll most likely be your story as well, unless you start making godly choices. The time you're investing in your major is important, but don't lose sight of other more important things in the midst of that. Relationships are more important than money, so use your wealth to gain friends. Spend it on other people, not yourself. So, prioritize going to core. Make a commitment to be there every week. I remember two other good friends of mine. They're long gone, so I'll just say their names. It's Luke and Casey. And both of them were Corfas while they were students. But their freshman year, they were just little freshmen in core together. And Casey was at core every week, and Luke was at core sometimes. And the story, I mean, I wasn't there. I mean, I heard it from Brandon, who heard it from them. The story goes they're walking along to core, or maybe away from core, and basically Luke asks Casey, I miss core because I need to study. I have so much homework all the time. And Casey says, yeah, I have a lot of homework too, but I just made a commitment to be at core every week. And Luke was like, you can do that? You can just decide to be somewhere every week? And so he made that commitment, and he did go to core every week consistently. It's about the choices we make, not about letting life do whatever it wants to us. It's about making those godly choices. You know, prioritize core, prioritize one-on-ones. You know, meet with people for lunch or dinner or just to get to hang out. Get to know their stories and share your own. Get into a FOD study or focus on Jesus Bible study. Whoa. I think I messed up on this thing. But anyways, too many of us have just like hangout friends in our lives, right? And not enough cry on your shoulder friends. Right? You know that difference? They're the friends you just have fun with. You play Super Smash or something or whatever you're into. But when it gets to the hard times in life, you have no one to call, right? You want those friends in your life that you can share the deep parts with. Invest in those friendships as well. To have godly community, you have to make godly choices. So another choice we get to make is how we approach conflict in relationships. Ooh, all right. So we're going to another passage. And I mean, if we got into the whole context, I could preach a whole nother sermon on it. But again, no time for the weeds. We're not getting into that. We're going into Matthew 18, starting in verse 15. So if you want to open up your apps again, don't open up Instagram, skip over iMessage, go straight to the Bible. Matthew 18, starting in 15. I'm going to do 15, and I'm going to skip over to 21 and 22. All right, Matthew 18, 15, 21, and 22. It says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. And then in 21, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. So Jesus tells us how to deal with conflict. And he doesn't, contrary to popular belief, he doesn't say just be nice. He actually says, go up to them, point out their fault, and if they listen to you, woohoo, you win a brother or sister. He didn't say woohoo, but I said woohoo. That's the vibe I'm getting from Jesus there. And I think our world, our culture has become more and more conflict avoidant. How many conflict avoiders are in here tonight? Just me or yeah? We are afraid of confrontation, right? We would rather call people toxic and dump them, ghost them, rather than press into the discomfort and call them out on their toxicity and maybe have some of my own called out in the process, right? Sometimes I'm part of the toxicity. Sometimes we think we're being nice by avoiding the conflict, right? But then we often become passive aggressive or gossipers, right? We need this outlet to let someone know that we are being wronged. And maybe we are being wronged. But Jesus says, handle it by being direct in addressing it. Jesus was direct, right? He didn't flatter people. He didn't pretend to be their friend. He didn't talk behind their back. If he had a problem with you, you knew it. He also wasn't mean and aggressive about it, though. There's honesty, and then there's brutal honesty. When we deal with conflict with others, we deal with honesty, right? In a gentle manner, calling out their fault, but not being selfish about it and just saying, this is how you hurt me. You are a terrible person. Fix it. I would not suggest that line of, that line of thought. I remember I think this was my second year leading corps. I was leading corps with this guy called Christian, and he was a commuter student. And so he commuted every day 30 to 45 minutes to school. And during the first weeks of school, I was meeting people, I was inviting people, and I felt like he wasn't around as much. And so I felt like I was pulling more than my fair share of the weight. And I remember meeting with Brandon and Christian together. And this is the only year, I've met with Brandon every week for the past 11 years of my life, maybe 12. It's been a long time. And this is the only year I remember him ever doing this. He asked the two of us, are there any sources of tension or conflict between the two of you? And he never asked that before that year. He hasn't asked that after that year. And so I'm like, that was God. That was totally God. And I was just harboring this resentment towards Christian of just like, man, I've been doing so much of the work. So Brandon asked that question, and he says, are either of you harboring any tension or conflict with each other? And I said, no. No. Then, maybe a month or two later, Brandon asks the same question. Are either of you harboring any conflict or resentment towards the other? And I say no! I am so afraid of conflict. And I'm just like, if I just deny, even to myself, it'll go away eventually. But it didn't. And, me and Christian, we're fine friends. But I look back on that year, and that's something I regret. Because I imagine, what kind of friends could we have been if I had just been direct in dealing with it, right? Nip it in the bud rather than letting it go on and on and on. A better story about how I've matured and actually grown some over the years. I had this other friend that I was trying to become closer with. And so I would invite him to all these things I was doing. And he would respond in ways that kind of made me feel bad that I invited him in the first place. Like, oh man, like, it's such late notice, like, I can't come. Like, I'm like, oh, I feel like it's a week out, but okay, that's all right. And it's things like that. I wish I could go through my text and see but it's just like, I don't want to invite you to things anymore, but I want to get closer to you. And so I did get wiser, and I did directly address it. I was like, hey, you probably don't mean this, but I feel bad when you reject my invites. I shouldn't, you didn't want me to invite you in the first place. He's like, oh, no, that's not what I mean. Definitely, keep inviting me. I want us to grow closer. And boom, nipped in the bud. I'm still friends with him to this day, right? And so be direct in dealing with these conflicts. And when we've been wronged and the issue has been addressed, be quick to forgive, right? I think it's funny, right? In 21 and 22, Peter goes up to Jesus and says, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? And he picks, I think in his mind, this huge number, surely not this many, but we're gonna shoot for the stars here, Jesus. 7 times? And then Jesus says, no, many orders of magnitude greater than that. 77 times. In some translations, they say 7 times 70 times, which, quick maths, that's 490. That's not even in here. Someone check that on the calculator. Make sure I'm right. Yeah, we get to choose to forgive over and over and over again. And I think that leads into this last example of Jesus I want to look at and listen carefully to. In the Gospel of John, he writes, on the night he was betrayed by Judas to be crucified, Jesus tells his disciples, and so if you want to go to John 15, starting in verse 13. So this is the night he was betrayed by Judas to be crucified. John 15:13. We're going to be skipping around in John a lot, so keep those open. John 15:13, starting in 13, he says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends. I'm paraphrasing here. You are my friends. You are not my servants. You are my friends, right? That's 14 and 15. Now skip with me to chapter 13, all right? Verse 37. The disciple Simon Peter makes this claim. He says, I will lay down my life for you, right? He tells Jesus, I will follow you into death. And then Jesus tells him, before the rooster crows, right? Meaning before this night is even over, you will disown me 3 times. And it happens just as he predicted. All right, skip with me over to chapter 18. I'm giving you a tour of the Bible right now. John chapter 18. You're going to know the Gospel of John real well after tonight. All right, chapter 18, in the passages verses 15 through 18 and 25 through 27, we see Peter's denial of Jesus. Right, 3 times after Jesus is arrested, Peter's questioned by people around him. Right, they say, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" And he says, "No." And then they ask again, "Are you sure?" "No." "Really? Because you look like one of his disciples," right? They get even more confrontational. They essentially say, like, "Bro, like, didn't I see you with Jesus just a few hours ago?" Right? This is that 25 through 27. And Peter says, "No, I don't know this guy." Peter denies it again and again. Right? Before that night, just earlier in that night, Peter says, "I would lay down my life for you." But when it came time to do it, he didn't. He couldn't lay down his life for his friend, even as his friend was laying down his life for Peter. Jesus knew that would happen, and he still chose to call Peter his friend. Right? He knew all of his disciples would leave him. Right? All but one would watch from afar. Only one would watch from afar. And yet he chose them to be his friends, knowing they would hurt him and he would need to forgive them. Right? He didn't run away from friendship just because he knew he would get hurt. He made the choice to have friends. So to have godly community, you have to make godly choices. And that godly choice Jesus made was to love vulnerably. Right? That godly choice Jesus made was to love vulnerably. He loved them. He truly loved them. And true love is vulnerable. It allows the other person to be able to hurt you. When the other person can't hurt you, then you don't deeply love them. I'm not denying that you may love them in a sense, but deep love requires vulnerability. But the story doesn't end there, right? Jesus Christ comes back from the dead, right? He's arrested, crucified, died, and he comes back from the dead, and he appears to his friends. He shows them that pain and death have no power over him, that he's the God of all things, living and dead. He comes back having conquered death. He comes back in power and majesty, and even then he chooses to be vulnerable to them. He chooses to love vulnerably. Because he goes back to his friend. In John chapter 21, starting in verse 15, I believe. He goes back to his friend and he asks him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Now, growing up in church, I've often imagined this story as stoic Jesus, right? He knows what Peter's going to say, so he's just going through the motions, right? He's got the script all laid out. He's like, all right, on this day, at this time, at this second, I'm going to ask this, right? It's based off of this idea of a far-off God who is asking his subordinate, this peon, this human, if he has the correct worshipful posture. Or we can read our Bible closely and see that Jesus never chose to be a far-off God. Yahweh never chose to be a far-off God. He has always chosen to be close and to be vulnerable to us. He has chosen to be hurt by us. So when I read this story now, I see 2 friends together, one having laid down everything for the other, and the other having betrayed and broken that friendship with his actions. So these friends, Jesus asks his friend a vulnerable question, a question he may not be sure what the answer is, because he doesn't use the nickname he gave him. In the first chapter of John, when we're first introduced to Simon, son of John, Jesus says, "But I will call you Peter." Jesus is the one who gives him his name, Peter. But now, maybe Peter doesn't want anything to do with him. So Jesus says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" To which Peter replies, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." And again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." But Simon Peter had disowned Jesus 3 times, each time more adamantly than the last, right? Each time he had a chance to change his story, to fulfill what he had said that earlier that night, that he would die for Jesus. But he didn't. And so here Jesus gives him 3 chances to respond. So a 3rd time Jesus said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Can you imagine the vulnerability of you going up to anyone, asking them, "Do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" Peter probably remembered that he denied him 3 times. So he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And then skipping forward, he says to him, "Follow me." Those are his final words to Peter. So to have godly community, you have to make godly choices, even when it costs you everything. You have to love vulnerably. Jesus felt that sting of betrayal. He felt his friend disown him. But perhaps the even more vulnerable thing was coming back to his friend and asking him, "Do you love me?" Peter's actions before had very much communicated that he no longer loved Jesus. But Jesus loved him so much that he was willing to go back and ask him if that was true. "Do you love me?" You know, in this community, I found people who would sacrificially give for me. Many of the friends I made here support me financially now, stupid amounts of money, so that I can be here to serve you all. That community that we chose to be a part of when we were students and help build, they're investing in me so that it'll still be here for students like you. They're investing in your friendships. I found people in this community who would forgive me after I hurt them. People who wouldn't back down from telling me that I hurt them, right? People who wouldn't give up on the friendship just because I had messed up. And they would tell me rather than brushing it under the rug and give me an opportunity to make things right. In this community, I found people who would love me and whom I could love deeply, not because we wouldn't hurt each other, but because we wouldn't give up on each other. To have godly community, you have to make godly choices. And God has both given us the roadmap to that godly community and the Cliff Bars to sustain us on that journey. He gives us his Spirit to help us follow through with those hard choices. He teaches us to say no to the things that don't matter, that don't last. And he teaches us to say yes to the important things that will last forever. And you have that choice. Do you want to be part of something different, a godly community? So worship team, you guys can come on up. So look for opportunities to invest your money or your time into, things that will build relationships, right? Spend time with your friends. Grow deeper in how you relate to one another. Don't spend all your time on the surface, right? I'm going to give you a list of deep questions to ask. What is your relationship with your family like, right? That is some of the deepest core parts of our identity, is our family. How are you like your mom? How are you like your dad? What do you like about yourself and what don't you like? One of my personal favorite questions to ask anyone is, why are you the way that you are? Right? It's compelling, it's controversial because it seems like I'm coming after you, but I'm not. Why are you the way that you are? Learn about each other and pray for one another. We don't always have the best advice to give each other when we share our deepest parts. We don't always have the right words to say when a friend shares something hard with us. Often there are no right words to say, but it's still important to ask because we need someone to tell our sorrows to. It's not about having the right words. It's about being there. So be that person. If you have money, look for ways to bless others with it. If you have things like a car or a truck, or sometimes even a computer or an old phone, look for opportunities to bless your friends with it and invest in relationships that will last. When you have a conflict with someone, when you have a bone to pick with someone, get advice on how to bring it up and then bring it up quickly. Don't let wounds fester, right? Like Brandon talked about last week, things can get healed easier when we treat them early. Cuts don't need to become infections if you put Neosporin on them from the start. Hurts from friends don't need to be relationship breakers if we address them early on. Some language you can use, some good language you can use is, hey, this thing you did hurt my feelings. And then in response, you can say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for it to. I didn't know it would, but I'm so sorry that it hurt your feelings. How can I make sure next time that I don't do something that will hurt your feelings? And then forgive quickly. Sometimes you just need that language to say, I'm sorry. And love vulnerably, right? Be the one who takes the first step to deepen the relationship. Be the one who initiates more, right? Learn to initiate with your friends. I know it's vulnerable to risk rejection, but take that step anyways. Be the one who puts more of yourself out there. Others will disappoint you at times. They won't always relate to you in exactly the way you want, but love anyways because God loved you first. He loved you vulnerably first. Love anyways and accept what they can give. Forgive and love. Because to have godly community, you have to make godly choices. Amen? Amen. All right, I'm going to pray. We're going to get back into worship. God, I thank you so much for bringing us all here tonight. Thank you for, the path that you've taken us on, the friendships you've given us. I pray that you would bless our time in college, however much time we have left. I pray that you would give us the wisdom to make godly choices. Give us the strength to make those godly choices. Give us the wisdom to depend on you in those godly choices, that we might build up this community, that it can be here for us and for generations to come, that there will always be people here to welcome new students, to welcome the lonely, the brokenhearted, the ones just desperately searching for friends. God, we trust that you have good things in store for us, and though the path may be hard, we know you're with us always. We love you so much. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.